Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today is a deals clinic. So we're looking at your deals, looking at kind of how we can help and how we can use Nimbus to help understand which deals might work and which might not. And I'm delighted today to introduce my colleague Andrew, who's customer success director here. Hey Andrew, how you doing?
Hi Paul, very good, thank you. Excited for today, really.
Absolutely. And I suppose just to kind of introduce Andrew to everybody here. So Andrew was 10 years land and planning director at Taylor Wimpey, so kind of knows a thing or two about how to find a piece of land and appraise an opportunity, hopefully. So hopefully we're in safe hands today. So really kind of let's just jump straight into it. Let's start looking at some deals. We've had the odd question or two raised. If anybody would like to ask a question, then what we'd like you to do is to look at your control panel, your Zoom control panel. If you're on a mobile, just tap the screen and it'll open up a little control panel. If you just raise your hand on that little control panel, that will tell us that you're trying to ask us a question. We can unmute you and get you to ask those questions for us here. But while you kind of work out how to do that and sort of play around with that, then be sort of a first come first serve. So do jump ahead and quickly press the button if you've got questions and sites you want us to look at. But in the meantime, what we'll do just while you're sort of working all that out, we have had a question dropped into our customer success team here, and that question, Andrew, I just thought I might just kind of raise. So
yeah, go for it.
Around airspace and the sort of new Class AB airspace PD rights that have come out in effect, and what it's saying is that the new PD regs are pretty tight, so it's almost like a full planning application, like a watered down planning application we sort of talked about previously, and councils can obviously enforce conditions around those, around traffic and transport and all that kind of stuff. And the kind of question we got was, if we had any developers looking to overcome these issues and what common hurdles do they face and all of that kind of good stuff, and then how do they develop these schemes out? What's the method of construction and sort of how are they building off those party walls? So sort of the short answer, this stuff's pretty new, and one of the things that sort of Andrew and I were talking about before the webinar was sort of how we can kind of help with that, and so the obvious answer that we came up with was around the planning export, actually. So I don't know if you want to kind of look at that, Andrew, or sort of perhaps share that, but in essence sort of the trick to this really was sort of saying, well, actually, as part of the Elite platform, you get access to the planning export. That planning export allows you to kind of search for keywords, key terms across sort of numerous councils at any one time. And the idea that we sort of came across was, well, if you search in the planning export for the word Class A or Class AB or something like that, then what that will do is that'll go off and search across sort of various councils' websites for those particular keywords in effect. So if we do a search for Class AB or something, then what we'll find is are there any planning applications across those councils that mention that new PD right of Class AB? For me, that's what you'd always put into that planning application. You'd sort of say Class AB, planning application to put 2 stories on top of whatever, under Class AB to sort of tell the planning officer that there's PD rights for this, so you should be giving me consent for that. And even kind of Class ZA or something like that kind of might be interesting as well. That when that exports, that pulls all those councils together. So if you kind of pick a few around where you're kind of targeting, where your kind of search areas are, then that will give you a list of those planning applications that have gone in those areas. And of course, that will also show you who the developers are. It'll give you links through to the council's websites. You can go and see the application itself, see the plans, see the ways in which these things, there'll be a before and after, kind of a existing and proposed set of plans. You'll see kind of how that building lays out as it is, and how then the developers are sort of proposing to build that extension above it, if you like. And of course, crucially, it'll tell you perhaps prices they're paying, kind of interesting, but also who the architects are, who the planners are that they're kind of getting to go and support them with all of that too. So this is Andrew running that search here in the background. I'll sort of be chatting away there, Andrew. I'll kind of let you kind of take over rather than sort of sit in natural way while
well, like I say, just to repeat what you've done there. So the planning export is very versatile. Ultimately you can be searching for whatever type of development you're interested in, and you can see here we've got 4 applications have actually come back across the 3 local authorities we searched. I can't remember where it was now, Merton, Lambeth and Croydon or something. But interestingly, they're all in Merton here. You've got 3 for Class AA and then 1 for Class AB. And interestingly, 2 of those were refused, 1 of which has been granted, and 1's actually invalid. And so a bit like, you know, what you're saying in terms of how do we build it? You know, what are we, you know, what kind of documents have we got to submit? You know, I think the question that was raised mentioned about sort of transport issues and things like that, which, yeah, ultimately, even though you're going for prior approval, you know, the design and external appearance is going to be absolutely key, making sure it's in keeping with the area. And traffic, you're going to have to be able to mitigate the impact of the traffic. Now, a lot of councils will have policies around car parking per, you know, number of bedrooms in a unit. So therefore, if you're building, you know, 10 extra 2 beds, and their council and the policy is they need to have 1 car parking space per 2-bed apartment, then you're going to have to provide 10 extra spaces. You know, so you've got to think about that when you're looking at schemes. It's not just a great, I can now build upwards. It's I've got to build upwards and then get another, you know, what's a parking space, sort of 3 by 5 meters, you know, by 10, you know, so then you've got to then think of where am I going to get that space as well, and the sufficient turning to do that. But one of the ways of then trying to understand what else are people doing is by looking at this planning exports. And now we've got a great example here where we've got, certainly with Class AA, we can now see, right, this one has been approved, this one's been refused. Well, let's look up the details. What were the differences? What were the reasons for refusal on that one? Well, the one that was approved, you know, what was the difference? You know, did they submit additional plans to show, did they have to do some sort of 3D sketching of, you know, how it's going to sort of fit in the street scene or whatever it might be? It might be an extra couple £100 as a, you know, to get your architect to draw up something. But if it's going to be something which is going to convince the planners that it's not a great impact, and that's the way to go forward.
I don't know about you, Andrew, but we used to do that quite a lot. So when we submit an our planning application, you know, we'd sort of do a lot of these kind of convenience stores, you know, it'd be like a little black box almost on the end of a car park sort of thing. We always do a watercolor CGI, so it would kind of always look very soft and very nice, and you sort of put it in front of the sort of council committee and stuff. Oh, this is what we're going to build. You know, it's look how nicely it kind of blends in, and it's kind of, you know, it's a box with a Tesco's board or a Co-op board or a Sainsbury's board on the outside of it. It's kind of as simple as that, really. But we found that was really helpful. Did you do that with your stuff?
Yeah, there would be a lot. Certainly, you know, the sort of larger schemes, we'd absolutely have, you know, a lot of sort of lifestyle sort of drawings and all of that kind of stuff, sort of showing how the look and the feel. But also if it's, you know, if we knew there was, you know, so I did a scheme where we were next to a listed church. So there was this, you know, fabulous church sort of, you know, in this village. And we were about 2 fields away, but because of the right of way that was going through the site, obviously it was very important that they wanted to retain views from this right of way going across the site. So, you know, we had to then, you know, draw various plans to show, you know, these various views to the church and how the housing would sit nicely with it and all of that kind of stuff. So it is massively important, and it does absolutely sway the planners, because ultimately, you know, if the planner's looking at just, you know, black lines on a plan, it's difficult for them to go, oh, okay, yeah, you know what, I'm not feeling this one, I'm just going to say no. Well, it's you know, if it's in color and it's nice and you can see how it's all going to work, and actually you've got an architect explaining that it fits in with the environment and all of that kind of stuff, then, you know, these borderline ones, that probably will be enough to say, yeah, okay, then go on, then you have thought about it. You know, you're not just trying to sort of pull a fast one here. You know, I've, you know, certainly, you know, working in a big PLC, you know, we'd always go above and beyond. So, you know, you know, to reduce that risk and get that planning through as quick as possible. If it's a case of getting an architect to draw 3 or 4 extra plans, we draw 3 or 4 extra plans, you know. Now I know, you know, if I was going to doing that myself, I'd take a bit more of a view on it, but I'd always try and put something in there to try and just get over that point, because it's a lot more subjective. Transport, there's a policy behind it. In like flooding or something like that, you know, then it's very clear you're either in the flood zone or you're not. If you're in the flood zone, what's your mitigation, you know? So certainly on the subjective stuff, then you try and just go that extra step to show that you really are, you know, caring about putting something nice in that area.
Sure. We found a site there. So who are the people there then that are helpful then?
So yeah, so interesting here, Mayfair project. So, you know, certainly I come up with the question whether they were looking to develop it out themselves or maybe then buy it and sell it on. But obviously here we've now got a great example of a developer who is looking at those airspace opportunities, and therefore then, you know, if you're looking to maybe then sell that on, this is a great person to go and contact, based in London. Their details there. And then not only that, if you're then wondering, well, who do I want to submit an application for airspace? Then you have, annoyingly, not super great details, only 4 of them here, but it looks like there's a company there. And then there's a few others, but with being 4, then it'd just be worth it using the links on the left-hand side here, just quickly flicking through to Merton and pulling up the various details of their architect or planning consultant that they use as well.
Yeah, and the plans will be kind of interesting to sort of see, and who were the consultants they use as part of that. So when there's other reports in there, it's kind of all bottom right hand corner of the plan. Which is the firm that's kind of in that bottom right hand corner? Obviously, it's kind of often interesting, really. So
as I said, let's have a quick look at just a quick look at this scheme, really. Oops. Has it found it? No, it hasn't found it. This is just me being inept at pasting links in here, but we'll get there. And I just thought it'd be just worth having just a quick look at seeing the scheme. And, you know, so this was the one that was, so this was refused,
wasn't it? Yeah.
You know, so again, it'd be worth just having a quick look at, you know, and maybe why that was refused, because on the face of it, it doesn't look too bad, to be honest, on the corner here. But I think it does outline that just because there is the ability to have PD rights, it looks like it might be 4 stories. So then you might have height issues, but then saying that stuff over the other side of the road is higher, but then you would be quite high compared to this side. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was sort of height issues, but given that this isn't someone's particular scheme, we won't go, I think, probably too much into this one.
No, sure.
But it gives you an idea of obviously what you can do and the kind of information we can find out.
Yeah, cool. If you want to find some of these, Andrew, there's a strategy for this sort of stuff, isn't there? So let's just bring that up and just find. Here's some more we can also find if we're into this sort of stuff.
Indeed. So I mean, let's just see. So interestingly, so obviously we have the Elite Plus strategies. This is then helping people find opportunities depending on what kind of strategy you're looking for. So airspace above flats, using things like Class A, AB, AC. I think it depends on the configuration of the building, which one it is, but ultimately A something is airspace above flats, and then airspace above houses. We've got the 2. That's just for inside the M25. But interestingly, you can see how we've highlighted the one over the road rather than this one. I wonder mainly because of that height difference, because I'm just trying to think now.
Well, maybe so there's sort of 2 things that are kind of key with this. So one is the deliverability of the scheme. So we only show properties that are owned by investors. So it may be that it looks like that's an investor, frankly, but so it may be that means we're not highlighting the one over the road, or indeed if there are leases in place. So if there are leases in place, then it makes life apologies. No, so if there it's an investor, it's held as an investor, then that would be fine. If there's any kind of characteristic around that building, or if perhaps it was built at the wrong time. So if it was built outside the 1948 to 2018 window, it would exclude it as well. So kind of a few of those things that might affect it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously this is just owned by a company here, but
so we jump into the sort of see whether on the company's house link whether it may then be other things like it's listed, or it's kind of this other constraints that stop it. So things like whether it floods as well. I think that might be.
Well, it looks like this person's been trying many different.
Oh, really?
To,
not their first refusal.
To do something on that particular scheme, but I think the key thing is, like you say, we're trying to, with the overlay, is we're trying to find those ones that are more suitable. And to be honest, when you do look at the road, because of the slope here, it does make sense to then sort of redevelop the one down to bring it up to this level, rather than one even higher and overcrowding this one. So, you know, especially I think it's only 3 stories. Well, it's 4 stories really, which is starting to get a bit questionable in terms of that height. Just say it's still within the height range here, actually. So obviously you've got to be less than 18 meters. And the tallest bit here looks like about 14 meters. So clearly just.
So it might be if they're putting 2 stories on top, that'd be a problem. You probably get one on. That might be the massing that's a problem, because if it's if it goes above 18 meters in total, so 2 more stories on top of that's going to put another 6 meters on top. If it's really 14, it's going to be 20 meters. It needs to be a maximum of 18, I believe. It was 18 or 27 on airspace for flats. So so it may be that it's kind of too tall for that to work. So maybe what's can be excluded from the strategy. So when you sort of try to work out why it's excluding certain buildings, you kind of end up going through the kind of the process you would do yourself when you start looking at buildings and saying, well, does it, kind of going through the various categories of whether it should or shouldn't. So that's a much smaller building. It's kind of why I expect it might be that height that's the issue on that building. But so it's very interesting in terms of some of the stuff that it pulls out there.
Indeed.
Cool. So let's just see. Does anybody want to ask a question live to us? So we've got the panel up. If you want to just click on the raise hand button, you've got kind of particular sites you want to look at, particular things you'd like us to run through. So Nigel wants to ask a question. Let's just invite Nigel up. I'm just going to ask you to unmute Nigel.
Hello.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I sent a message earlier on. I don't know if you are in receipt of that message, are you?
I haven't seen it personally. I got one sent through, and I must admit I'm pretty bad at my emails actually. So so it's probably sat in my emails, and I'll get told off when I speak to the success team later. So apologies, but
yeah, no problem. Yeah, the question really is, I've found a site in Diss in Norfolk, and it is the. Do you want me to give you the address?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
It is 8 Marketplace, Diss.
Let's have a look.
Yeah, that's the one. So this is what's called, it's an old department store basically, under the name of Beals, who went bust, a bit like Debenhams have done a very similar thing. And this was sold as a whole unit. There it is there. And I'm looking to buy the upstairs on a long leasehold, but I don't know how to value that particular upstairs. It's the size of it is 2,550 square feet, approximately 57 square feet, I think it is.
Yeah, sure. Andrew, can I take the control back of this? I feel like this is one that I should be answering, I think. So let me have a little dig around and see what we can find out. Albeit my 2 screens seem to have moved around all over the place. So this is the building here that we're talking about, isn't it? So there's a lease in place, perhaps was. So that's the old Beals. So you're saying that Beals have left, have they, Nigel?
Beals are no more. Yeah, it's empty. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So that would have shown the lease details of Beals in effect. So let's just kind of close it up. So we've then got upstairs. So what we should have on here is that sort of rates assessment. And so I suppose the area that you're sort of talking about is this chunk at the top here. So you've got this kind of 1,300 square feet, 130, 40, 130, et cetera. And what I think is always kind of interesting for this is, in fact, there's sort of perhaps opportunity at the back of it as well. So I don't know kind of how close your discussions are with them, but I do kind of wonder. So let me kind of perhaps start at the start for the other people that are watching too, and sort of explain where my mind's going with this. But
okay, yeah.
So what the information panel there is showing you is showing you the rate assessment. So that's purely, what does the district valuer think the rent was back in 2015? So it's not the rent, but it's giving me a sort of a fag packet. What sort of ballpark are we in that, for that space in effect? And so
yes,
because it's saying £1.86, I'm in for £2.50, £3, something like that. £3 would seem like quite a lot of rent. £2.50 would seem about the right kind of ballpark, if you like. And then, so what I'm then thinking is, well, what are the residential values in the area? So kind of how do I know what I'm going to get into there, and how much space is there? What what I'm going to sell that stuff for, of course. So the first bit in my head is, well, I'm in for about £2.50 a foot. So when this building is let to Beales as a whole lump, you know, it's got a rental level of about 45 grand. So add a bit, because that's 2015 prices rather than today's price. So maybe, you know, it could be 60 grand's worth, I suppose.
Yeah.
But actually, that building of that 45, if you like, 24 of that is the Zone A, the 1,200 square feet at the front.
Yeah.
So kind of half the value of that building is sat at the front of it, and then you've got a third of the value sat in this middle bit, and then the rest of it is what it's saying is virtually nothing in effect. So there's very small amounts of value off the back of the rest of the property.
Yeah.
So what I'm kind of thinking is, well, the natural thing to do is to say, well, you know, those bits there are, you know, if I'm sort of taking a rough fag packet on it, you know, £9 a foot there means it's probably worth 12 in terms of rental level, which means 8%, you know, even 7%, maybe, I don't know. We're probably in at £160, £170 a foot kind of level for that, which means converting the Zone B is probably going to be a bit difficult, I suspect, when we start looking at residential value. So in my head, I'm thinking, you know, Zone A, Zone B is probably more valuable as it is.
Yeah.
But Zone C at £4.50, £4.50 probably means it's £5.50, £6, you know, 6% yield means £100 a foot kind of territory. Converted for 100, I'm in for 200. If I've got sales values of 300, I'm kind of okay, thanks. But of course, in the back part at £2.30, that value is going to half. So I'm kind of, you know, I'm going for bought or converted for 130, 140 quid a foot, I suspect. So that's why I kind of sort of zoned in on that kind of, pardon the pun, Zone C, Zone D, and that sort of stuff. But that's kind of why I sort of know there's value in that back part of the property.
The mezzanine in there, yeah.
Got a bit more ground floor there at 90p a foot. So that's, again, going to be interesting. And then all of that first floor, you know, what it's saying is that the intrinsic rental level, the intrinsic value that space is adding to the retail element of the property is minimal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm sort of in my head just totting this stuff up, and it's 3 or 4 grand's worth out of 45 grand.
Yes.
And, you know, so convert that into rent rather than rates, it's 4 or 5 grand's worth, which means there's only really, you know, if it was 5 grand, there's only 75, 80 grand's worth of intrinsic capital value that space is adding to that building, based on it being let to Beales. And we could go a stage further, again, buy a copy of that lease to see what the old lease was. So I can go and do that there, buy my register, shove my basket, check out, buy a copy of the lease that will say, well, the rent was actually 55,000 or whatever. So I've got that kind of understanding. Well, actually, based on that 55 grand, there was only 7 or whatever that's associated with the upper floors.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Because I'm sort of pro-ratering it based on, you know, the space that's not worth very much of the total, in effect.
Yes. So I guess my next sort of part of the question is, when you're obviously, when you buy a shop, you buy a lease and then you pay rent.
Yep.
But when you have a leasehold property, as in somewhere to live, you don't pay rent in that way, do you? As in, so I'm looking to get a 999-year lease, but having never dealt with these leases before, how does that process? I mean, I'm expecting it to be. Is it just a once only payment? Will they be expecting annual rents on top of that? Because I don't understand.
So you can kind of. This is a really good question. So sort of the obvious answer is same as your flat, right? So you buy a flat, you pay 200 grand for a flat, you might pay some ground rent of £100 a year for 999 years, but it's nominal compared with the capital outlay. So you could do that, and you could say to them, well, I'll tell you what, I want to go and buy that upper space from you. You know, I think that the overall rental level that you're losing off the back of that is 5 grand, 6 grand, 7 grand. I'll pay you 100 grand for those other parts. How about that? They might say that's okay. They might say, well, I'd probably rather keep for 100 grand off the back of a building that's probably worth £1 million. I'd probably rather not lose control of that upper space. I'd probably rather keep control of that.
Yep.
What you could do on the other hand is you could perhaps gear that, and you could perhaps pay them a sort of a turnover rent kind of thing. So you could work out what it's worth with planning that you're putting into that, maybe. So you could start to structure a deal more cleverly with that, if you like. So I won't pay anything up front, but I'll pay you 25% of the rent that I receive. So I'm going to convert it to residential and let it, and I'll pay you 25% of that going forward, which then would reflect a return that's probably quite a lot higher. You'll make a nice return because you'll pay for the fit out costs, the change of use, if you like, the redevelopment costs. So you could kind of structure however you like. It's the usual thing you would do with this sort of thing. You say, I'll pay you £1 million for the whole lot, and then you'd carve the upper parts out, you'd redevelop those, drive the value up, but then you're buying that front half of the building with the 50 grand's worth of rent at 7%, so you're paying 700 grand for the shop, which you're then going to sell back on again at probably 700 grand when you relet it, to kind of unlock the upper parts. But with this, you could do something kind of rather more creative around that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I feel like
I think
I'm
so,
not
yeah.
giving the right answer. Sort of what the true position is. So I think what I'm doing here is I'm sort of looking at what the sales values are. So sales values on average are 250. So I'm sort of in my head, I'm thinking to add 20% to that, it's probably 300 quid a foot. You can use the full on, sales comparables and the filters to really understand exactly what's sold and really kind of pin that down to a rate per square foot and find your particular, that kind of stuff. But in my head, kind of quick fact packet, while we're on a webinar, just kind of talking that through, it's probably worth about 300 quid a foot once it's built, roughly, I suspect.
Yes.
So you've then got a bunch of space upstairs. So what is that space upstairs? Well, we've got all of that lot there in effect. In fact, I bet you anything this comes back on the shops lockers overlay, which is probably going to run the calculation for us. So we just
It
run
does.
that.
Yeah. One next door does though.
Oh, does it not? That's interesting. Does it not? Does it not? So what that's probably saying then, so why is it not like that then? It doesn't like the upper floor space. So it's saying 30 quid plus 100 quid, 130, 250 foot sales values. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, not quite sure why that one isn't.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Because it
So-
was on, 150-ish, isn't it?
It feels like that should stack up to me. It feels like that should stack. So it's so I think what I'm trying to say is that I would pro rata of the space that you can get back. And I suppose my first waffle at the start was to explain, I think there's opportunity at the back of there as well.
Yeah, the mezzanine bit, yeah.
Yeah, so the bit at the back, and I think there's probably a second building at the back there as well. So there's probably opportunity there, probably opportunity at the back there. Looks like there's kind of, there's quite a lot of opportunity to perhaps, with that kind of, that strange sort of return, I think you probably could get some windows on the side here and probably do something, probably quite a lot in the back there.
Yeah.
Plus the top floor. So that's kind of, that first waffle was sort of saying, that I think there's opportunity there, which probably sits in that lot and this bit at the back, and also this building at the back, and there's opportunity with that as well.
Yeah.
You could then, quite a nice scheme actually, come in the back, and depending on what that looks like around the back there, you can probably get quite a nice, there we go. It looks like that might abut there as well. So, kind of this sort of plant, well, there's your access there, isn't it? So you create sort of your access way, your entrance through in the back, and then you kind of go in, convert all this lot, convert the upper parts, convert this as well. And you kind of create a lock-up shop at the front. And that's kind of what the sort of information panel was telling me, that I'd expect that lot to stack up. So you've got all that space there, and you kind of could leave the front bit, whether it's just those two bits or whether it includes the zone C as well.
Yes.
Zone C, I think, should probably stack up as well. So it's kind of, where's the natural split that allows you to kind of create some flats at the back or little townhouses or whatever you're gonna do with that.
Yeah.
What's the value of that? Well, I'd be looking at, the true underlying existing use value for that is saying, well, what's the true rent? Well, it's kind of quite easy because you just go and buy a copy of that lease and say, well, when you let this to Beales, you let it at X, and that lease there from 2011 will tell you what the headline rent was back then. So kind of, this is what Beales paid, and perhaps they can tell you what Beales paid on when they left. You could then use that as a pro rata and say, well, actually, the amount of rent you're going to lose off the back of that is this much, because you can pro rata, let's say it's 100 grand, you can pro rata the 100 grand that they were paying by how much is sat in the zone with the back part of it, is kind of lower value amounts, and relative to what's left with them at the front. So we think that there's 20% of value is in the other parts of the building, therefore we can lose 20 grand off the value of the building because you've got 100 grand's worth of rent. And then off the back of that, if we assume that was a 7% yield, which is a pretty smoky yield, thanks very much for retail at the moment, then how about I pay you 300 grand for it? That would be a sensible starting point for it.
Right.
Off the back of it, you've then got, well, what's it worth with your change of use for resi, and your residual value calculation will kind of work that out for you, and then you kind of structure that difference between the two.
Okay. Yeah.
If you do it subject to planning, I'll give a bit more, I'll give more of the thing, but I'm going to pay for the planning costs and stuff. I'm going to build it out at the end of the day, so you can kind of then sort of share an element of that because there's growth in value on it.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense? That kind of answered that.
Yeah, I think so. I'll have to sort of sit and chew it over and try and understand it all. But thank you very much. That definitely helps me.
I mean, the other thing you could do with it is you could use the commercial comps kind of be interesting. See what other commercial properties are sold nearby. Another thing, kind of commercial availability might be interesting. So you've got property there on the market over the road, 8,500 square feet to let, which is
Same one.
Same one.
There you go. So that's so you've got it on with them. So it's for sale to let. So they're asking, what are they asking for? It's a ground floor sales of 3,500 feet. What have we got? A quoting rent on there for us? That would kind of then give you the answer, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
New lease, that's unhelpful, isn't it? That's unhelpful. You just ask what the quoting rent is. Give a speculative call into the agents and just say, interested in the property, what's the quoting rent for it? We ring them.
Who's that? Widebrow, is it?
Widebrow, yeah. And it's Ewan Dodds or Francis Britton. So I think that would get you, what's the quoting rent? Off the back of that, you can then use, not that we're in the building, it's building up here. You can then use this as the breakdown of how that quoting rent is derived from, which gives you kind of then how much of that rent you're going to lose by carving that up parts off, and then apply yield to that. It's going to give you a sensible starting point.
Okay. Yep, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay. Easy. Fabulous. Is that okay, Nigel? Any other questions or?
No, that was it really. It was just so it's just understanding leases, upstairs leases, because I've only ever bought freehold in the past, so the lease concept is different to me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can do it. We've done it the other way around in that you buy the freehold and you grant a lease the shop back. So that, and the lease of the shop is then very similar to your lease of your flat upstairs in effect, because it's just here's right to occupy this ground floor space for 99 years. That's kind of an easier thing, especially if you're developing it. Kind of you need control of a freehold. So you give them a long lease of the ground floor, and then you've got control of the rest of the building and extending and all that kind of stuff.
Am I over worrying about the retail space becoming a risk because of the way retail's going?
That's a jolly good question. That's a jolly good question. I think the complexion of the high street is going to change. I think what's kind of interesting when you start thinking about these sorts of locations, though, is that that front part of the building. So that's my cursor's gone there. Look, so that front part of the building there, sort of £18 a foot and £9 a foot. That's an average of 12, 13 quid or something.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel particularly punchy when it comes to like an office rent or a kind of a quasi kind of space. And so I think the complexion of the high street will change. Obviously now it's all Class E. The way you can use those buildings is going to change. And I think we're not quite sure how that's going to sort of pan out. But I sort of see that certainly at the edge of these towns, you're going to find that some of that's going to convert to office space and kind of different uses, different kind of things that now are part of Class E are going to be using some of those edge. I suppose some of the very edge of the high street may well end up as housing and this sort of stuff as well. So that complexion will change. But I think where that price isn't particularly high, I feel like those changes of use are much easier. When you're at 70 quid a foot, £100 a foot zone A in a £300 a foot area, really retail is the only use for it because you're not getting anywhere near that value in any other uses. So I think that sort of that secondary, there are kind of not, I think this is quite secondary when it comes to this, but it's kind of a sort of a lower value sort of town in terms of the rental levels that are there, and so it's not a bad shout, I don't think.
Okay.
So you can reposition that into other uses that are probably not going to. It's probably not going to take a huge bath in terms of the rental levels.
Because I think you've got the options of, you know, splitting that unit up into 2 smaller units. So, you know, if the demand becomes more a case of people wanting sort of 1,000 square feet or something, you've got options of, you know, so for me that, you know, the sort of key unit, you know, on this sort of main, you know, I know it's called marketplace, but sort of high street location, I think there's always going to be demand for something. It's just, you know, you've got to think it's just an adaptable space that you're just going to keep sort of adapting and reletting it at whatever suits.
I suppose the other thing that's kind of interesting is the Class G PD rights. So you've got the shops uppers kind of PD rights, if you like, where you get 2 flats above the retail unit, but if you split the retail unit into 3 or 4, then you get 2 lots above each of them. So actually, you then, you know, if you split that into, I don't know, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 units, you could have 10 flats above it under PD. And I guess if there was any HMOs in the area, which I guess there probably aren't, well, let's have a little look.
I think so. No,
then
it's not that sort of town. I don't think.
no, I was going to say it's not that sort of town, but I thought I'd roll the dice and see whether I got lucky, which I haven't. So that would show you where the HMOs were in effect. We haven't got any around there. So just sort of, because you can then back to back the Class G with Class L to go to HMO as well. So then you can have, you know, 10 flats and then 10 6-bed HMOs. You get 6 letting rooms off the back of just the PD rights. With that, so that would be kind of, but there's no market, so I wouldn't bother with that. So no marketplace for it. Fabulous. Is that kind of
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thanks very much for your time, and that's sort of made it a bit clearer than it was before. But thank you.
The other question I suppose we've got is that is there any someone like the requirements list would kind of give you any kind of commercial requirements that are kicking around? So it's quite a big lump. It's quite a big building in the centre of this. So, you know, there's Poundlands are there? Is there another discount retailer that's kind of interested in this as well? So kind of what requirements are there for this? And some like the requirement list would show you that. Okay. Because that retail space is a worry. You know, is there a Subway requirement? Is there a Domino's requirement? You've got a bit of parking at the back. Maybe there's that. Maybe there's sort of a bunch of other commercial operators that might pre-let that space off you. And of course, because you've got quite a big footprint, you might suddenly find that you're really the only show in town because then it's the only one that's big enough for you know, is there a Sainsbury's requirement for, you know, or something like that, or a Co-op requirement or something? You know, it's just kind of interesting to see whether that, because there are some reasonable covenants down here. You've got kind of Costa, you've got W.H. Smiths and stuff. So it's not a bad high street. And of course, then having that big lump on the high street itself means it's really the only place that those kind of bigger retailers might go. Yes. And it sort of also jumps into a conversation or a webinar we did with CACI, where one of the interesting things is that the retailers now are looking at kind of managing different channels that they've got. So it's not just about, you know, filling a shop full of stuff and selling it. It's a case of managing my online presence, my website, my distribution that sits alongside all of that, alongside the sales through the front door of the retail that I've got. And so the reason I say that is that retailers then have different requirements now from the requirements they had pre-lockdown and pre-COVID. Yeah. And so is there a different requirement now that does Boots need more space or less space, and therefore does that create the opportunity for them to move and relocate into what you've got? Or so there's kind of a sort of what we're kind of recommending is that you could almost mail shop all of the operators along that street and say, are you looking to do you need a different amount of space? Because actually I've got this building that's coming to the market that then could be tailored for what you're after. Okay. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you very much. No problem. Nice to speak to you. Let's jump. We had a couple more questions. We had Ian as well would like to ask a question. Let's see if we can get Ian on. Hi, Ian. Let's see if we can unmute you. Just ask him to unmute, Ian. Struggling to unmute Ian at the moment.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You can hear me, can you?
We can, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, great.
Absolutely.
No, it's just a general question, actually, rather than a specific one. I'm just a bit confused on the new Class MA, where you can convert former commercial shops, offices, and so on to residential. Does that, and I think that comes in from the 1st of August, doesn't it? From recollection. Does that only allow you to convert existing buildings, or could you knock a building down and rebuild it completely?
Good question.
So
it's conversion is the true position. So
Right. Okay.
you're converting under Class MA into Resi.
Right.
The interesting question, though, is what does that Class MA? Well, I think it's quite interesting. We'll see what you think it is. The interesting question, I think, is that if you've got PD rights to repurpose it, and you go in and you submit your prior approval and you get your prior approval to convert it to Resi, and it's a shop or it's an office or whatever, and the occupier then has left. This was a conversation that we had on a webinar last week before, I can't remember when it was. In essence, the act of strip out is the commencement of that planning application, actually, because it's works relating to that. So as the tenant leaves, that's the stamp duty thing in effect. So when the tenant leaves, that kind of strip out is part of the works to convert, in effect, because you're sort of moving away from the existing use into the new one.
Sure.
Then you've implemented the planning application, you've implemented the planning, so you've then got the consent, because the prior approval, you've got the consent, and therefore the building is now being converted to residential.
Right.
If you then resubmit and say, I now want to put a new application in, so a detailed application to demolish this building and build residential on it, you're demolishing a residential building to rebuild it as residential.
Oh,
So the change of use isn't contentious. You already got consent.
I see. Hmm.
So I think
So I mean, sort of generally speaking, it is sort of a conversion of sort of commercial buildings. But I followed what you said just there. I mean, if you got planning permission, then it would then be residential, and then so you could then possibly apply to knock it down and rebuild it.
Absolutely.
Basically.
And I think so. One of the big things I think about the new PD rights is it's kind of creating an open door. It's kind of, where before you have to prove the change of use, now it's, well, we want this change of use, and so the door's open. You've got to go and walk through it and make sure that you kind of make sure it's right, and to submit the documents around the back of that and to the report to make sure that it's reasonable to do it, in effect. So I think where before you were proving the use and it's kind of on you to prove it, now it's on them to disprove that you can have it in many ways. That's kind of sort of the change in the mindset in sort of the sort of noddy terms that I kind of think of it on, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to sort of take up too much of your time, but I'm also a bit confused because the 56 days prior approval, what does that mean exactly? That they have to, because you have, with MA, you have to do it under, it's 56 days prior approval. I mean, how does that work exactly? What does that
So on the new Class MA, I must confess, I'm not entirely sure. On the old PD rights, in fact, I think it's the same on MA as the old G&O and that sort of stuff.
It is 56 days on MA as well, yeah.
Yeah, so if they don't, so basically,
days, right?
yeah, so basically, if they don't decide it in that time, then you're deemed to get the consent. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah. So it's
Right.
the onus is on them. If they want to refuse it, they've got to move quickly to refuse it, or make comments on it and everything else, because that's the whole point. It's you're just implementing this prior approval. You effectively have the approval. You're just confirming the details and just saying, oh, by the way, I'm doing this.
Right.
And you're just essentially giving the council 56 days notice to say no, basically. So if they don't do it in that period, you've got deemed consent.
Right.
But like we saw with Class A/B and those things, yeah, they will look at it from a design and appearance point of view. They will look at it from a transport impact, from a flooding impact. Obviously, if it's on a high street with Class MA, then they will look, and you'll have to do the is it the impact assessment, I think, with the high street? I'm trying to think now whether and when conservation areas as well, there's another impact assessment you've got to do when it's in a conservation area. So, you know, there are elements that you've got to sort of prove alongside that prior approval. So, you know, there is plenty of opportunity for the council to say no.
Right.
So that's why it's important to, like I say, to focus on the right opportunities.
Yeah.
You know, like I say, use a tool to help you find them.
And there is actually, I'm sort of tempted to open up the test site actually, but I'm not allowed to, Andrew. I get told off for this when I get, oh look, we've got a new thing quick, but we have got a Class MA strategy coming out in the very near future. I've seen the drafts and played with the drafts. They're very exciting. So there will be a kind of a Class MA sort of equivalent to the shops and uppers and the various other strategies we've got on the that's due very soon actually. So I've been playing with it. It's great, amazing. So
great. That's what I mean. Just one thing, just a final thing. I'm a bit confused about the which classes apply to like the airspace above houses and flats, and also the shops with uppers. There are specific classes for those, are there? And is there anywhere where I can see those written down? So
yeah, sure. So I think these little things here do that. So when you kind of hover over the strategy section, it does kind of explain which ones they're aiming at in effect. So which things they're categorizing.
right.
If you want to know more about the PD rights themselves, then it's like the Planning Geek website's very useful for that. You can sort of they've got a list of all the different, or kind of, you know, go to gov.uk and sort of see the details there.
Right.
In essence, the strategy one is commercial buildings. So the old Class B1, so A, B, and C. So offices, sheds, and R&D buildings in effect, light industrial and R&D, knocking those down and rebuilding them as flats. So that's the Class ZA.
Right.
The airspace above flats then this is where they kind of get a bit confusing, because it's Class A, AA, and AB depending on the ground, as Andrew was saying before. But in essence, what that airspace above flats is saying that if you've got a 3-story building, it doesn't matter if the ground floor is in commercial use or residential use, as long as it's got 2 floors of flats above that ground floor, then, and they provided it's not listed and etc., then the PD rights apply. It's just which class you apply. So whether it's A, B, or AA, so around that is, then the AA and the AB, I believe, is when it brings in commercial on the ground floor in effect. So if it's shops with 2 floors of flats, it's AA and AB. If it's just a 3-story block of flats, it's Class A. But in my head, so when I look at this, it kind of is that 3-story building with the flats above it, built at the right time, with the right planning constraints around it, then the PD rights should apply. And I kind of worry about whether it's A, AB, or AA. Kind of once I've got a deal going forward.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with those rights, so yeah, you've got permitted development rights to those. Do you need prior approval as well on those, or
yes, they're prior approvals rather than PD.
Right.
But it's the same sort of thing. It's a sort of watered down planning application, but it's that kind of principle of the doors open for you to walk through it, rather than you've got to prove that it's okay to do it, kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Right. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you for questions. Lovely. Right. So, do you have any more questions, Andrew? I was just conscious that I'd not got any more sent through to me, I don't believe. Even if anyone else in the audience wants to, so Anita wants to ask a question as well. Let's just invite Anita up. Just see if we can unmute you. Hi, Anita.
Hi, I've just got a quick question. I want to, this is all new to me anyway. I just wanted to know what kind of technology you're using to show all these things. Quite fascinating.
Yeah, of course, this is Nimbus Maps. So this is the Elite Plus system, or the Elite system with the plus add-ons, if you like. So it's the Elite system, and these are little buttons here that I've been using. That's the difference between the Elite and the Elite Plus system.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what it is. And I suppose in essence, it helps you find opportunities, helps you check where they work, and then helps you connect with owners and architects and the right people to kind of make all these things happen, really.
Okay.
So that's it. Have you got anything else you want to say to that on that?
No. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The only thing I would add to that, Anita, is if you do want a demonstration of the platform, if you're new to Nimbus Maps and everything, then do let us know. We can get a demonstration lined up for you. You can see it in detail, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So in fact, that probably leads me on neatly to the next bit, really, which is just jump back into my slides. If anybody is like Anita, kind of interested in the system, so there is on the Elite system, there's a 14-day free trial that you can use to do the stuff that Andrew and I have been kind of using it for today. You can then have a one-to-one demonstration with one of Andrew's team. We'll sort of take you through how to use it in your particular area of kind of what you're interested in. And so what I can do is just to help with that is we've got a little poll that that I can run. So if you'd like that one-to-one demonstration of the Elite platform, that first question is for you. If you'd like to try the 14-day free trial of the Elite system, that second question is for you. If you'd like to just jump on and sign up to Elite, then equally that third question is for you. So we'll leave that running for you for a moment. We do have some links I can pop into the chat as well, which if people are interested in that as well, I can just pop that into the chat for you as well. So the 14-day free trial link's there, the one-to-one demonstration link is there, and the if you want to talk to them about signing up to Elite, then that final one's for you too. Fabulous. Andrew, any other kind of questions that have come through? I think it was a question in the chat I saw a moment ago. I think you've got, as you put the Planning Geek website for Class MA, I've asked them to put that in actually, so that's there. And they're asking about the cost of the add-ons for the strategies. Yes, that's $450 plus VAT for those strategies on top.
That seems to be all the questions. It seems to be, relatively quiet or shy bunch of people today. But if there are any questions, like I say, we've got a few more minutes. More than happy to answer any questions, whether it relates to the platform or a particular site. Like I say, we're at your disposal.
Fabulous. Okay, brilliant. Well, let's finish that poll there. And another quick question. So, as was asked, are there any tutorials running through the basics of the system? Yeah, absolutely. So, in the platform itself, in fact, Andrew, perhaps you answer this. There's kind of various places on it we can go for this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So, as I think Paul was about to show on the left-hand side there in the platform, the third button down is help videos. So when you're actually in the platform, there's a whole load of sort of help videos and how-to guides to sort of do the various sort of basic elements of using Nimbus Maps. We've also got on the website, there's a sort of success section on there, which is all about webinars and how-to guides and sort of PDFs and all that kind of stuff about how to do various bits, like this learn section here and stuff as well. And there you go, there's your tutorials and your webinars, etc. on the website. But also you've got the little speech bubble in the bottom right-hand corner that goes through to the support team. So if there isn't anything you've not been able to sort of figure out through the videos, the tutorials, drop a question to the team there, and they'll be able to answer your questions and help you out and get yourself sorted. Hopefully that answers your question.
Shane said, is the replay going to be sent out by email? Yes, that should be on its way out to you as well. So when we sort of finish today, then the team in the office will say in the office. Is it? Well, we're in the office at the moment, aren't we? We're still working from home, and I'm not quite sure what the plan is after 19th, whether there's going to be more people in the office or not. But the team will send out the video for today after the event.
Yeah.
Amazing. I suppose all the I think that's probably answered the questions in the chat. That's great. I suppose all that remains from me is to say, firstly, thank you, Andrew, for your time, and thanks for today.
No problem. Thank you.
And then just finally, a thank you from me, and thank you to you for watching. I've been Paul Davis and Andrew Green, and we've been Nimbus Maps. We'll see you soon. All the best.